Hello, welcome to this video. Before we get started, please read the disclaimer. Trading is risky. Please do your homework. This is not trading advice. Alright, let's get started. So I've been asked to make a video on how to trade the turtle trading strategy, I guess the rules and method itself. And I was also asked to do it in a way that's simple. So I am going to try and explain it in a way that I think is easy to understand. And so I have this diagram here, and essentially the strategy comes down to, or any strategy itself comes down to, knowing where to enter, knowing where to get out, and knowing how much to trade. And that's really it. The turtle strategy itself is very objective in answering each of these. In this video, I'll just go through an overview of all of these components, and then I'm going to break down each element in its own video. So for the entry itself, we have an initial position and additional positions. So how it works is, in any given trade, instead of just jumping in and risking all of your money at one time, the strategy scales in. It scales in with 4 positions, and that's what I'm calling the initial position and the additional positions. Now, before I go further, how I'm explaining it is how I understand it and how I think it's best explained for someone to get. This is from me going through different sources. There is a free PDF put together by Curtis Faith, who is a former turtle. You can search for that, and he gives the rules according to him. And I have a turtle trading book which explains it. Essentially, it's the same information, they just explain it in different ways. So that's all I'm doing here. I'm kind of breaking it down to how I look at it and how I think it's easier to grasp. So the entry itself takes any trade and breaks it into 4 positions. You'll have your initial position that'll get you into the trade, and you'll have 3 more positions that you add on to that. I think some people call it pyramiding, but you're essentially adding more to the trade. How you get into the initial position is different than how you get into the additional positions. The initial position is entered via a breakout, which I will explain further on, and that's denoted by a channel. And then there's 2 variations that can be used to get into that initial position. Next, each position itself will have a where to get out, a stop. And so for every position, whether it's the initial or the 3 subsequent positions, they will all have an entry stop. The entry stop is governed by the ATR, which is the average true range, and as the trade progresses, you will trail the stop. This will be where you lock in profits, hopefully, or get you out of the trade. This initial entry stop is to provide protection in case the market goes against you. The trailing stop moves and adjusts itself as the trade moves in your favor. If the trade doesn't move in your favor, then you're going to be stopped out with the entry stop. The trailing stop is governed by the channel. So as you see here, I've kind of highlighted the channel concept. So the channel comes into play in the entry as well as the trailing stop. The ATR comes into play for the entry as well as the entry stop. And so finally you have the ATR coming up again with the money management / risk management, which is how many shares or contracts to trade. So the reason I'm highlighting this is that you can see that the ATR, the average true range, comes into play 3 times in each of the sections. The channel comes into account in 2 sections. So in order to understand this, we need to understand the channel concept as well as the ATR. So that's why I'm going to break it down and start explaining the channel, the ATR, and then applying it to each of these elements. Finally, we'll talk about diversification, which is, I think, a key point to the whole application of the strategy. The strategy itself is not meant to be applied to a specific market, for example, just the stock market or just Bitcoin. I think what makes the strategy work is the fact that you are applying it across a broad range of markets, attempting to capture trends in anything. It doesn't really matter what the market is, but it's not being isolated to one market. So we'll talk a bit about that. And then finally, I will go through a walkthrough of a typical way to apply it overall. So if that sounds good, we'll move on to the video on entries.